Sandra Bullock in a darker and grittier role than what she's typically done? Yeah, sign me up. The Unforgivable is a new Netflix drama. Will you be checking it out this weekend? Released from prison after serving a sentence for a violent crime, Ruth Slater re enters a society that refuses to forgive her past. Facing severe judgment from the place she once called home, her only hope for finding redemption is finding the estranged younger sister she was forced to leave behind. So Sandra Bullock plays Ruth, who, when we first meet her, she's just being released from prison. Her parole officer is played by Rob Morgan, and right from the start, I just want more of him. I mean, he was in Just Mercy a year or so ago, and he was the absolute standout in that movie for me. Now, in this role, he's influential in a few moments, but mostly his role is subjugated to the background. Ruth wants to be reunited with her younger sister, whom she hasn't had any contact with for 20 years. As a parolee, Ruth works two different jobs, and at one of those, she begins to have a friendship with a coworker played by Jon Bernthal. Now, at one point, Ruth visits her childhood home where she encounters Viola Davis and Vincent D'Onofrio, who just happens to be an attorney that can assist Ruth in reuniting with her sister. Because of the nature of Ruth's crime, she's not a popular parolee, and has more than a few people unhappy that she's out. And this is the impetus for some of the drama that will ensue during this hour and 52-minute movie. All right, so I'm going to start with Bullock. I mean, I liked her performance. She looks very gaunt, especially in her face, which shows a hard life in prison. And I enjoyed how she's quietly desperate, but is wildly restrained so that she doesn't get thrown back into custody just for any sort of infraction. We can see that struggle in her eyes and body language, especially as she encounters difficulty in trying to find her sister. She's pretty convincing in her quest, as well as her frustration and determination to reconnect with her sister. And I really enjoyed watching her go through her daily monotony, just quietly existing, but all the while dealing with that nagging sadness of not being able to connect with her sibling. And when Bullock was doing that, she was great. There's a slight mystery that plays out through the course of the story where we get bits and pieces of the events that landed Ruth in prison, and they're shown to us in brief flashback moments, slowly piecing together everything that had occurred. So I watched this about a week or so ago, and I've been mulling it over since. There's been something bugging me about it since I did watch it, and I think what it comes down to is that this is a very surface level story. I mean, it really could have just been a movie of the week. Yeah, Sandra Bullock gives a great performance, but everything else failed to wow me or even provide a good amount of depth. Jon Bernthal has an intriguing character, and I really like the dynamic that his character was beginning to have with Ruth. And the same goes for Ruth and D'Onofrio's character. I mean, he's got some good chemistry with her, but it's limited, and then after a scene in the middle of the movie, he's just gone from the film. Viola Davis is wildly underused in this. She's married to D'Onofrio's character, and they have the beginnings of a really powerful and impactful conversation. But then that's dropped as well. And she really only has about 3 scenes. Now, she's great for what she does have, but she's kept mainly in the background. There's even a tense interaction between Ruth and a character played by Richard Thomas. They're emotional and explosive, which on one hand made sense, but on the other, it did seem a little out of proportion. Now, there's a storyline that relates to the mystery of the plot, which I'm not going to go into detail on, but suffice to say that progression is completely obvious, and it felt a little cheap when all was said and done. The events are broadcast well in advance, which, for me, ruined the suspense in this instance. Now, one item of the story did catch me off guard, and because of that, it gave me a bit of a gut punch. Now, maybe you'll see it coming, and maybe I should have seen it coming too, but I didn't, so I appreciated that small surprise within the narrative. Some of the cinematography looked good, and that's typically when we were getting landscape and establishing shots. But then there are a few where a character will be driving in a vehicle, or even in the opening scene where Ruth steps outside and she's leaving the prison. All of those scenes are clearly green screen, and unfortunately they're really fake looking. I think this stands out more and more as technology continues to become such that it's really hard to tell when something's not actually shot in the environment it's shown to be. So when we have bad backgrounds, they're all the more obvious. And in this case, they were painfully noticeable. I had mentioned the mystery that plays out in flashbacks, and while I enjoyed that unfolding, there is quite a bit of repetition, which I'm not certain was wholly necessary. I mean, some overlap is going to happen, and it's even good to help establish the timeline, but we don't need to see the same events multiple times with very little new footage added on. Aside from Ruth's desperation to reconnect with her sister, everything else feels like we're only getting a small piece of a larger story. It's like there's a ton more that the story wants to convey, or at least discuss, but there's not enough time. So themes and concepts are introduced and briefly touched upon, only to be discarded in favor of moving on to the next item on the list. There are even some incidents or moments in Ruth's sister's life that are hinted at or briefly mentioned, but that's where the story stops with them. I think the biggest issue this story has is that it wants to tell more than it has the ability to do so. It's got like 4 to 6 arms and really only the capability of telling 2 of them in the time allotted. And this makes everything in the narrative suffer because nothing is fully examined and explored. So overall, I enjoyed all of the performances in this, especially Bullock. I don't think the other characters, though, get the opportunity to really expand on their roles, and I would have loved to have seen more of certain character arcs. And when this is combined with overambitious storylines, the narrative as a whole suffers due to not being able to devote the necessary time to build out the story in a meaningful way. And while I really appreciated one aspect of the plot that I didn't see coming, what follows was too predictable, leading to a conclusion that felt schmaltzy and then convenient. I wanted to like this more and had really been looking forward to it. Sadly, though, it just tried to do too much, weakening the entire thing. There's sex, brief nudity, a lot of profanity, and a bunch of violence. I give The Unforgivable 2.5 out of 5 couches. What's your favorite Sandra Bullock performance? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.